Do you want to be the master of acid damage? Do you want to fully immerse yourself in role-playing a black Dragonborn? Do you want to fully optimize the Elemental Adept feat to its utmost? Then this is the build for you. Hey guys, it's Wonders, and I have another build video for you today. Today, I decided to go with a full caster build, and I'm going to be using the Elemental Adept feat, and I'm going to be trying to optimize it the best I can. I found some really unique interactions with the Elemental Adept feat and a certain spell, and I decided to focus on acid damage for a few reasons. One of the main reasons is acid damage isn't resisted very much, and it's also not a lot of creatures are immune to it. Also, a lot of acid damage spells use a d4 dice, and that dice size benefits the most from the Elemental Adept feat. For those of you who don't know, Elemental Adept essentially makes it so that whenever you roll a 1 on a damage die, it automatically becomes a 2. One of my favorite interactions with the new 2024 rules that this has is with the spell Chromatic Orb. So Chromatic Orb has changed in the 2024 rules. Now you pick the damage type just like you used to, but now it has the effect of Chaos Bolt, where after it hits a target, if you get 2 dice with your damage dice that are the same, then it bounces to a second target within 30 feet of it. It's a d8 on the dice, but if you think about this, if you use the Elemental Adept feat, all 1s become 2s. So what that means is if you roll a 1 and a 2 on the damage dice, those count as 2. Basically, Elemental Adept makes it so you can have a higher chance for Chromatic Orb to bounce and do a slight bit more damage. Again, Chromatic Orb being a spell where you can pick the damage type, this build could probably work just as well with any element, but acid damage is just kind of cool to me, so that's why we're going with that. Before we go into too much detail, let's go ahead and switch over to the character sheet. Alright, so for level 1, not surprisingly, we're going to go with Sorcerer. Sorcerer in the 2024 rules has a lot of unique changes. One of the big things is this new ability, innate sorcery. The best way to summarize it is it's essentially a sorcerer rage, quote unquote, where you get to bonus action activate it, and for 1 minute you have +1 to your spell save DCs, and you have advantage on attack rolls with sorcerer spells specifically. As far as spell pickups, these don't really matter. Acid Splash and Sorcerer's Burst are the important ones. And as far as spells, you can go with Shield and Tasha's Caustic Brew. We got a spell, level 1 spell that's real nice to use, does some acid damage, and then Acid Splash and Sorcerer's Burst both do acid damage. Sorcerer's Burst can technically be any damage type elemental, but Acid Splash is obviously acid damage. One unique thing about Acid Splash that wasn't in the 2014 rules is now it's a 5-foot radius sphere, so there's a chance to hit technically up to 4 targets. They would have to all be perfectly in a square next to each other, which won't happen very often. But still, Acid Splash now has an AoE component that it didn't have before. Sorcerer's Burst is a brand new cantrip. It's a 1d8 damage attack roll, ranged attack roll, 120 feet range, and then you can choose acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, psychic, or thunder. It's not just elemental damage, it's also psychic damage. So yeah, that's a real big, awesome spread of damage types you can choose from. But if you roll an 8 on a d8, for this spell, you can roll another d8 and add it to the damage. When you cast this spell, the maximum number of d8s you can add to the spell's damage equals your spellcasting ability modifier. And then as you get higher levels, it increases in how many dice you roll initially, which then will increase the amount of chances you can roll an 8. And with innate sorcery, since you'll have advantage on your attack rolls, there's a higher chance to get a crit, which adds even more dice. It could potentially be a d8. So pretty cool spell, and it's one of the few cantrips that I feel like has a fun thing to it where you could get bonus damage, and it scales really well. So that's super nice. And then background. Okay, we're gonna go custom background. They don't have that available right now on D&D Beyond, but now that the custom background rules have been added to the Dungeon Master's Guide, I assume they'll add it later. There is a custom background option, but that's the 2014 version of it. I hope they add it soon, but what we're going to try to do is we're going to get It's really important for this build to get Magic Initiate, Wizard, choose Charisma as your casting stat, and you want Constitution and Charisma. I'm going to put Constitution at 2 and Charisma at 1 for that, okay? And then species, we're of course picking Dragonborn. The new Dragonborn gets this awesome breath weapon that can be a line or a cone, which is really cool, 15-foot cone or a 30-foot line. Most of the time, and definitely for the DPR calculation, I'm going to be counting one target for this, but it is nice to know that we could potentially hit multiple targets with this breath weapon. But a 15-foot cone really isn't that big. And one thing that's really cool now is you can replace one of your weapon attacks with the breath weapon if you have extra attack, which is really cool. And then you get damage resistance to acid damage, and then we're going to get Draconic Flight. When you reach character level 5, you can channel Draconic Magic to give yourself temporary flight. As a bonus action, you get flight for 10 minutes, and it's the same as your speed. So that's cool. Okay, so for ability scores, we're going point buy. I would dump Strength and Intelligence, go for a 15 Con, 15 Charisma, and a decent 14 Dexterity. As far as equipment, you won't really need anything specific. I would maybe at this early levels, instead of picking Tasha's Caustic Brew even, I might instead pick Mage Armor if you're really worried about your AC. There's going to be something that happens very soon that changes our AC, so keep that in mind. But yeah, at the beginning our AC is 12, pretty low, but it is level 1. Sorcerer's Burst, you got 2 innate sorcery charges, and you got 2 breath weapons, so yeah, that's how level 1 is looking. Level 2 Sorcerer, we're going to get Quicken Spell, and I would get Transmuted Spell. This is just so that the situation where you want to use a spell that normally is another damage type, you can make it acid damage. And then level 3 Sorcerer, this is probably pretty obvious, but we're going to be going with Draconic Sorcery. One of the great things about Draconic Sorcery in this version of D&D 5e, the 2024 rules, we now get a subclass spell list. So we have Draconic Spells, level 3 Alter Self, Chromatic Orb, Command, and Dragon's Breath. Really good spells to have at level 3. And this is when our build is going to start to make a little bit more sense. You can honestly pick whatever second level spells you would like. The spells that you get with the subclass are basically the ones we're going to be using. So the reason we picked Find Familiar is because we're going to be casting Dragon's Breath, which is a bonus action, and you touch one willing creature. This will be the familiar from Find Familiar. Probably go with the owl. Pretty standard. The owl has flyby, so it can get in a range of a enemy, and it can then attack, and then it can fly away without taking an opportunity attack. And until the spell ends, the target can make a magic action to exhale 15-foot cone of an elemental damage type. Basically, you're going to have a acid breath weapon, and your familiar is going to have an acid breath weapon. And familiars normally can't attack, but they can with this spell. And that's what we're going to be concentrating on for quite a long time, actually. And with our action, after we cast Dragon's Breath on our familiar that we most likely have precast, we're going to be casting Chromatic Orb with acid damage. And what's kind of crazy about this, at level 2, it's already 4d8. I found this Reddit post, and I don't know how accurate it is. Let me know down in the comments if this Michael3110 is correct. He said that the chance to leap after hitting your attack roll with Chromatic Orb with 3d8, it's a 34.4, 4d8, it's 59%, 5d8, it's 79%, and then as you can see, it keeps going higher until it's basically guaranteed by 5th level. So that's super interesting to think about. It'll definitely be higher when we get to level 4 and we take the Elemental Adept feat. Charisma score, of course, and acid damage. So at this level, level 4, we now have Elemental Adept. And one thing to note, the reason why I'm going for the Constitution and Charisma is because my Dragon's Breath weapon is based off of my Constitution instead of my Charisma. So that's why we're trying to get them to keep up with each other. And that being said, I'm going to start going into the next class, and that will be Bard. We're going to be multi-classing Sorcerer and Bard here. And I'm going to go ahead and go up to 2nd level Bard. So yeah, there's nothing very specific for this damage report for level 6, but we are going to go ahead and dip into Bard just to have it. You guys probably already know where I'm going with this, but yes. Again, this level, there's some really good utility spells like Healing Word and stuff that you'll be able to pick up that sorcerers normally don't have access to. Also some cantrips like Vicious Mockery and the like. But again, this isn't really about our damage situation. You could even take Thunder Wave and Transmute Spell and push people with Acid Wave. That's kind of fun. There's certain things you can do with this, but that being said, okay, I'm going to show you a combat scenario with this build at level 6. And honestly, not a lot is going to change as we level up. It's mostly going to be upcasting the spells that we already have at level 6, which is nice. So first of all, the combat starts. You got your Barbarian and your Paladin party members, hypothetically speaking. And they'll probably rush in, attack the Bandit. This first round of combat, you're going to bonus action activate your innate sorcery. Unfortunately, this build uses the Dragon's Breath spell, which is a bonus action spell, as a big part of the build. So there is going to be some setup. So in combats where you don't think advantage or +1 to your saving throws is going to matter that much, or you're getting advantage through another source, then maybe just go ahead and bonus action cast Dragon's Breath in round 1. But yeah, so we're casting innate sorcery in round 1, and then you're going to cast Chromatic Orb at level 3. What's nice about this, I'm using this as a visual representation. It is not an AoE spell, it's an attack roll spell. Is you'll hit the bandit, you can hit any of the bandits, and it's a 30-foot range. As long as the spell has 2 die that are the same die, it will bounce, which is going to be a bit more than 80% with 5d8. And so it'll most likely bounce. So you got a bounce here and a bounce here. And that's 3 targets hitting for 5d8. And then that's your round 1. Let's say this bandit dies. And the Paladin Barbarian, they move on to the next target. You got your bandits attacking the Paladin. You got your Griffin attacking the Paladin. Second round of combat starts. You're going to cast Dragon's Breath on the Owl. Then you're going to rush in. You only have 30 feet of movement though. So in this specific situation, you're not going to quite get too close to the enemies. But then your Owl with 60-foot fly speed is going to fly on in, going to cast its Dragon Breath attack, and you'll probably be hitting 1 target or 2. For the DPR calculation, I'm doing 1 target, but there are chances you'll hit 2 or maybe even 3 or 4. In this situation, you could hit 2 plus one of your allies. Paladins might be okay with that, And then I forgot to mention, because you already cast a spell, that being Dragon's Breath, for this second round, you'll probably either cast Sorcerer's Burst or Acid Splash. Those are both ranged spells. You can't quite get close enough to do your own Acid Breath, but let's say in another scenario you are close enough, you could also do your Acid Breath. But then round 3 is where the damage really pumps up. Again, your Owl would probably fly back a bit so that it is less likely to get hurt. Round 3 comes around, you get a bit closer. You can cast Acid Breath as your action. Your Owl can do the Dragon's Breath as its action. And then you're going to cast Chromatic Orb again at 5th level with a Quicken Spell Meta Magic. And you got boom, boom, boom. 3 targets hit again with 5d8. And then your 4th round is the exact same as round 3, but because you used your 3rd level spell slot, you're going to be casting it at a lower level. And this is going to happen a lot throughout this build. I'm not going to do the map on every DPR calculation. Is more the beginning one just to get you the gist of it. Also with Dragon's Breath, you can do a line, and sometimes the line will be better than the cone. So keep that in mind. It's really cool that you can switch it out depending on the situation. Also, I haven't gotten to this yet, but obviously at later levels, you'll get access to spells like Fireball, which you could transmute spell. And then there's going to be a spell called Vitriolic Sphere that we'll talk about later. And that, of course, is going to be, both of them are a 20 radius sphere. Obviously, this is going to be beneficial from time to time. I will say, though, in a lot of situations, Chromatic Orb will be better than a big AoE because as long as targets are within 30 feet of each other, it will hit them, especially when we get to higher spell slots where the chance of it to bounce becomes almost 100. Here is the breakdown of the actions per round. And these DBR calculations are the 4 rounds damage averaged. Anytime I used a saving throw ability, I used my level's challenge rating and the average save DC for a creature of the same challenge rating. Also for Chromatic Orb, I reduced the damage by the percentage chance it is to bounce. So at this level, it's around 80% chance to bounce. So I calculated the damage for it hitting 3 targets and then reduced the damage by 80%. If that's not how that works, and you know a better way to calculate that, let me know down in the comments. But for AC 10, we got 51.5 DPR, which is pretty good at this level. And AC 15, we got a 48.2 DPR. And AC 20, we got 37.6 DPR. Again, this is assuming we have innate sorcery up, so all the attack rolls are at advantage, and all the saving throw abilities are using a +1 bonus. One thing I will mention, the owl is pretty fragile, so you might want to think about that when calculating the damage. If you have a different concentration spell you want to cast, totally cast a different concentration spell. That's just what did the most acid damage for this build. So that's why I went with that. After that damage report, we now have level 7, and we're gonna go with Sorcerer level 5 for level 7, and then we're gonna stop Sorcerer for a while. At level 5, we do get Sorcerer's Restoration. Basically, you can get sorcery points back once per short rest, and you get half of your sorcery points. So at level 5, we're going to get rounded down. We're going to get 2 sorcery points back on a once per short rest, which is really cool. It's nice. But not much changing to our rotation. And then level 3 Bard. I can't believe I haven't done Valor Bard yet, but we're going with Valor Bard. And we now have proficiency in martial weapons and medium armor and shields. And what are we going to do with that? We're probably going to pick up a shield. I also forgot to mention that our armor class, because of the Dragon Sorcery subclass, is now higher. Because of Draconic Resilience, we have an unarmored bonus of our Charisma mod plus our Dex mod. And then now we can grab a shield. So either have that prepared beforehand or yeah, and you can pick up a quarterstaff if you want, but you don't really need it. This whole build, you'll never need an actual weapon. And then we're gonna go all the way to level 6 Bard. For level 4 Bard, go ahead and just get our ability scores up. We're going to go 1 Charisma, 1 Constitution. This makes it so that we're at an even 18 in both. And this is where the build really starts to come together. So now we have the Valor Bard extra attack. So what we're going to be doing now is this, guys, okay? This is very fun. So with the Valor Bard extra attack, you attack twice instead of once whenever you take the attack action on your turn. In addition, you can cast one of your cantrips that has a casting time of an action in place of one of those attacks. So we can now cast either Acid Splash or Sorcerer's Burst instead of one of our extra attacks. And then also with our other attack, we have the breath weapon. When you take the attack action in your turn, you can replace one attack with your breath weapon. So essentially what we're going to be doing is we're still going to be bonus action casting Dragon's Breath at a lower level, definitely like level 4 on our familiar. And then we're going to cast for our action, we're going to do Dragon's Breath, and we're going to cast a cantrip. Most of the time, we're probably going to be casting Sorcerer's Burst, which is 3d8 at this level. Or if there are enemies really close by to each other, we're going to cast Acid Splash. So we got Breath Weapon, Acid Splash, Sorcerer's Burst. And then our round 2, we have Dragon's Breath up already on our familiar. So we're going to Quicken Spell Chromatic Orb at our highest level, which is 6th level, 8d8 Chromatic Orb acid damage, which has an almost 100% chance to bounce. So it's going to be bouncing all around the enemies, depending on how many enemies we have on the field. We're going to use our Acid Breath weapon, and we're going to use Sorcerer's Burst. And then our familiar is going to cast Acid Dragon's Breath, all in one round. Super fun. And now we're going to go ahead and do our level 11 damage report. Alright, so for the level 11 DPR, there's not many changes compared to the level 6 DPR as far as strategy. For round 1, we cast innate sorcery just like before, and then we're going to be doing a level 6 casting of Chromatic Orb. I've decided for the DPR calculations that I'm going to limit the amount of targets on Chromatic Orb to 5 targets for DPR calculations. That's actually higher than I would normally allow for AoE DPR, but because of the nature of Chromatic Orb, and especially at this level, it almost being a 100% chance for it to bounce if it hits, and us attacking at advantage for every attack because of innate sorcery, I feel like 5 is a reasonable number of targets to hit in a combat if they're available, with the only requirement being that we hit essentially, and that there are 5 targets within 30 feet of each other. And remember, if there's a target 60 feet away from the initial hit, as long as there's targets in between them that are hit as well, then it continues to bounce. But technically, this spell at 6th level allows you to hit 6 targets with it if they all bounce. And if you're typing in the comments that 5 targets is a little too generous, just know that when it comes to the Dragon's Breath spell and the Acid Breath, I am only having 1 target hit, so it all kind of evens out. Anyway, that's our round 1. Then round 2, we bonus action cast Dragon's Breath, and then we do our Acid Breath attack, and then we use our extra attack that we get from Valor Bard and cast Sorcerer's Burst at a target. Again, this could also be an Acid Splash casting, but for this build, I am doing Sorcerer's Burst. And then round 3 is our highest damaging round. We open with a Quicken Spell Chromatic Orb, but now at 5th level. And then we have the Acid Breath and Sorcerer's Burst. And then of course our Owl does Dragon's Breath. And then round 4 is an exact repeat of round 3. One thing to keep in mind as well, you have access to the aid spell because of your bard levels. If you want to use your 6th level spell slot to cast aid at 6th level, you could cast it on your Owl Familiar, and you could give your Owl Familiar 25 extra hit points. And that could be pretty helpful for this build, because starting at 11th level, chances of your Owl dying are starting to go up. But again, that would sacrifice some damage. So I could probably see you doing it at level 3, giving it 15 temp HP. I feel like that might be worth it. Anyway though, with this setup going on, the average damage of all 4 rounds, it's 171.9 DPR for AC 10, 160.2 DPR for AC 15, and then we got 124 DPR for AC of 20. Thematically, this is so epic. I would probably flavor my Owl to be a pseudo dragon just to make it, more fitting. So you got this little mini dragon flying around doing Acid Breath. Your Dragonborn character is doing Acid Breath. They're throwing Sorcerous Burst orbs of acid damage, and then they're also throwing an orb of chromatic energy. So in round 3 and 4, there's 4 instances of damage caused by you. Acid everywhere. We're done with College of Valor Bard, and essentially we're gonna keep on going until we get to our level 17 damage report in Sorcerer, which means we're gonna get all the way to level 9 Sorcerer. As we go up in these levels, there's a few things that we get access to. One of the things that I'm really excited for, this is where we're gonna occasionally be using other spells. So Vitriolic Sphere is a spell that not a lot of people talk about. This spell is really good, and we get access to it at level 17. We get access to it a little bit earlier than that, but it is essentially a acid damage fireball. But remember, it uses the D4s, so we have a higher chance to get more damage with Elemental Adept. But also, it does half damage on all the targets that fail at the end of the next turn of combat. So that's super cool. We also get access to Summon Dragon, but actually, it's really not that good of a spell. It would potentially be good in a more focused sorcerer build where you can cast it without concentration, but for this build we will never gain access to it, so it's really not that great of a spell for this build. If you have a really big area to attack, we also get access to Cone of Cold, which what's great about Cone of Cold is it's a 60-foot cone. We could always use Transmute spell meta magic to make it into acid damage, but as long as you're not having trouble keeping your Find Familiar up, Dragon's Breath is still really pumping pumping out the damage, especially because we keep upcasting it at higher levels. And then we go all the way to level 11. And again, we get access to 6 level spells, 6 level sorcerer spells. But again, there's really not spells that are especially good for this. Autoluke's Freezing Sphere is pretty cool, but it's not necessary to take. And there is also Chain Lightning. You can transmute this, but actually, if you cast Chromatic Orb at the same level, it has the potential to do more damage and hit more targets. The new Chromatic Orb it can hit as many targets as spell slot you use to cast it. For meta magic options, definitely take Empowered Spell. Let's say either with Sorcerer's Burst, you don't get a D8 and you really want to get that little bit of extra damage. You can use Empowered Spell to re-roll it. And what's great is 1 sorcery point, you can re-roll a number of damage dice up to your charisma modifier. That's a really good value. But you can also do this with Chromatic Orb. If you somehow, for some reason, don't get any doubles, you can use Empowered Spell to have a chance to get doubles. You could also use Heightened Spell to make a character have disadvantage on their saving throws against one of your spells. But with this build, it's a lot of attack rolls. There is saving throws, but a lot of those are AoE. But if there's a specific target you really want to get, then yeah, this would be good. Subtle Spell, if your DM is throwing a lot of enemies that have counterspell, could be really good. This is one thing that's really great. At level 6 Sorcerer, I forgot to mention this. If I didn't mention this, I probably mentioned it in the damage report if I hadn't already mentioned this. Your Draconic magic has an affinity with the damage type associated with dragons. Choose one of those types: acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison. You have resistance to that damage type, which we already have because of our Black Dragonborn ancestry. But when you cast a spell that deals damage to that type, you can add your charisma modifier to 1 damage roll of that spell. What's great about this is because we're going to be casting a cantrip and we're going to be using a quicken spell with Chromatic Orb, we're going to be able to add this twice a turn most of the time, as long as we hit our targets. Again, just so you know, if we use Chromatic Orb and we hit multiple targets, we can't add the charisma modifier to every single hit. It's only 1, but it's per casting of a spell. So cantrip, we can add +5, and then our quicken spell, Chromatic Orb, we can add +5 to 1 a hit. So that's cool. It's a little extra, eventually an extra 10 damage per turn. That's nothing to sneeze at, you know? And then now we can use innate sorcery with 2 sorcery points if we run out of the castings of it. As for our next ability score improvement, because we're going to have advantage on our sorcerer spells because of innate sorcery, I'm going to max out my constitution first because I have advantage on my attack rolls already, and then I already get a +1 to my saving throw spells. So I'm going to max out my constitution first to make that breath weapon be able to hit as best as it can. And then we're going to go ahead and do our level 17 damage report. All right, so we have the level 17 DPR. A few things I'll mention. I'm assuming we're using a 5th level spell slot to cast aid on a few of our allies, ourself and our owl familiar. At level 17 though, having an owl flying around with 21 HP has a high chance of dying. And at this level, you probably have some other concentration spells that you might want to cast. They wouldn't do as much direct acid damage, but they do have the potential to help more with utility or control. For example, casting slow would reduce your target's saving throws by 2 and AC by 2. And there's plenty of other control spells that are worth casting. But essentially, if you don't cast Dragon's Breath on a familiar, you're essentially taking away 21 DPR for 3 rounds, which is round 2, 3, and 4, which is around 63 damage in a 4-round combat. So if you feel like your owl can survive, and if you feel like the combat is going to be even more than 4 rounds, then Dragon's Breath is definitely still worth casting. But if you don't think it'll even be 4 rounds, or you're really looking more for control and less for damage, then definitely think about concentrating on something else. And we're casting at 6th level for this, and then we're casting Chromatic Orb from 9th level down. So it'll be cast at 9th level, then 8th level, then 7th level, with our round 3 being our big damage round. But we're also opening up with the 9th level Chromatic Orb. And then we went ahead and added our Elemental Affinity. Let me know what you guys think about this. For round 2, I added the Elemental Affinity damage to Dragon's Breath because the only requirement it has is that you cast a spell that does damage of the element type I of course realized that after the first initial casting, when the owl uses Dragon's Breath, we won't add it then. We'll just add it per the casting. So you can kind of see on the screen, I got Chromatic Orb, I have the +4 when round 1, then Dragon's Breath round 2, and also Sorcerer's Burst round 2. And then we have it for Sorcerer's Burst and Chromatic Orb for round 3 and 4. And again, of course, for all the AoE spells, we are assuming 5 targets. I did the math, by the way. Vitriolic Sphere still does less damage than Upcast Chromatic Orb. It does have the effect of doing 5d4 acid damage on the second round, but that unfortunately does not scale. It only the initial damage scales. So we have AC 10 DPR is 246.1, AC 15 DPR is 239.3, and AC 20 DPR is 209.2. Looking pretty good for this build. All right, so for our last 3 levels, we are going to go to 12. I'm not going to take one of the level 19 boons. I'm just going to go straight charisma. We are now maxed out with our charisma and our con. And then these last 2 levels, just to maximize this damage output the most, I'm actually going to go for fighter. And this is literally straight up, I'm just trying to get action surge. The main reason why is we already have the spells we want to use. The only thing Draconic Sorcery has to offer is Dragon Wings, which we already have because we're a Dragonborn. So we're not going to be wearing armor. We could technically, but if you want, you could use defense. But I'm going to take blind fighting. Because why not? Why not have blind sight with a range of 10 feet? I feel like that's great to have. Weapon mastery, so you can put anything you want. I don't even have weapons on my version of this build, but if you want to take advantage of some weapons, you only have a 14 dex, so you won't be able to utilize weapons very much, and you've dumped your strength. But now we have Action Surge. And Action Surge normally doesn't allow you to use magic, but because of the Valor Bard, we'll now be able to do a breath weapon 2 times, and we're going to be able to cast a cantrip 2 times, on 1 round of combat. But still, that's super fun to me. So level 20, we're doing insane damage. The main reason we're not using spells like Tasha's Caustic Brew, by the way, the concentration, it only adds 2d4 extra acid damage if you concentrate on it at the start of each turn. And that doesn't scale. Only the initial damage scales. And that's the same reason we're not using Summon Dragon. Summon Dragon damage, you get more rend attacks, but the breath weapon is always 2d6, which is crazy to me. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and do the final level 20 damage report. All right, so we finally have the level 20 DPR. It's not much different from the level 17 DPR, which makes sense. The only thing that really changed for damage is our charisma modifier is now capped at 20. So our saves and attack rolls are slightly higher, and we get a +1 added to elemental affinity. And then we've acquired Action Surge. I went ahead and decided to do Action Surge on round 3, mostly just to have the burstiest round possible. That makes AC 10 of round 3. You're doing 355 damage, which is pretty crazy for a burst round. But anyway, with all that being said, AC 10 average for 4 rounds is 259.3, AC 15 is 249, and AC 20 is 222.9 DPR. This build required me to do a ton of math, so if I made any mistakes, this is generally pretty close. You could really spend the time to check my math if you'd like. Anyway, I hope you guys liked the build. This build was really fun for me to make. I am excited for the holiday season. I have a few builds planned. I'm definitely gonna have a build similar to this build being acid damage. I'm gonna have a cold damage focused caster build, which I think will be very fun for the holiday season. If you enjoyed the build video, go ahead and subscribe down below. Like the video, share it with one of your friends if you would like to, and I'm gonna have a video out next week, hopefully. I'm trying to be more regular with my videos. I took a week off of work just to use my PTO, and I decided to make a bunch of videos. So this is video number 1 of the PTO week. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Peace out.